Tom was always fascinated by the idea of adventure and discovery. He could never remember the moment that got him so interested in these things, but was already confident that this was what he wanted to do for the rest of his life. Before long, he was jumping from quest to quest, destination to destination. He was always trying to reach his next goal. Where would the adventure take him next? The group of friends had been able to make their way through the country of Argentina quite easily. Luckily, a few of the friends spoke Spanish, and in turn were able to communicate their way to where they wanted to go. Before long, all of them were ready to start, standing in front of the mouth to the rainforest. Tom, who had already been on several trips such as this one, was ready to lead from the front. In fact, it was Tom that had decided that this adventure was a good idea in the first place. Although he thought that many of the stories were likely untrue, he found it inspiring to hear of what ancient adventurers had previously found in this area. Of course, generations back, there had been many people who had discovered vast treasure and gold in places like this. Perhaps the team would strike it lucky as well. As much as the prospect of riches drove them on, each of the friends were quite happy to see this as a fun vacation. To everyone else except Tom, this would be a great opportunity to see more of the world. Even Tom himself, who was primarily here to uncover his dream, could not deny that the expanse of the rainforest was quite beautiful. Already, in spite of how much he had researched the region before coming here, he could barely identify all of the various birds and insects that he saw as the group made their way through the foliage. It was incredible, as though they were entering another world entirely. Boldly, the group had also decided to enter the famous series of rainforests without the help of a guide. There had been a time when some of the friends had suggested this idea to Tom, who had then shortly refused, reminding them that he had plenty of knowledge about this place already. As much as there was some doubt in their hearts, they knew that their friend was perfectly capable and didn't want to shun his confidence so close to embarking on the trip. It just didn't seem right. As Tom's friends continued to comment in amazement, looking up into the interconnected world of the rainforest, Tom's own eyes were glued to a map that he had taken from home. Much to his delight, everything was already going to plan. Of course, he was delighted about this. It had taken him so much time to get all of this organized. It was the least that he expected after all of the effort that he had put in over the last few months. His only hope now was that it all paid off in the end. After all of the struggle that he had been through, he had to know that there was some precious treasure waiting for him. As the group went on, the friends started to wonder about what they would encounter next. Even though some of them had read about the exotic creatures that existed here, not one of them feared the strong dangers. Before long, Tom's friends were starting to become curious about where the team was headed next. Jamie, who had already been on a few adventures with his friend, looked over Tom's shoulder as he was tracing his way through the path ahead. Unsure of where they were headed next, he asked Tom what their journey would look like for the rest of the day. Tom's face was cold as he responded, letting his friend know that he should be prepared for a lot more walking and effort. If they were to make it to where any treasure was likely buried, it might take all day to make it to that point. In addition, it would also mean that they would have to move at quite a pace. There was no way that they could get there by dawdling, that was for sure. Jamie, as much as he had come here expecting to relax and enjoy the sights at least somewhat, was a little let down by this. Why hadn't his friend told him sooner that the trip would be centered around the discovery of these things? As much as he knew that Tom was fanatical about the treasure that was rumored to exist in the rainforest, he thought that they would at least make time to enjoy the rainforest for what it was. For Jamie, it was impossible to understand why they would come such a long distance without at least trying to have some fun. However, even though he felt the need to complain about the situation, he still had to trust in the leadership of his friend, knowing very well that Tom only wanted to fulfill his dream. No matter what Jamie thought, he knew that he had to respect this. And so, as everyone else in the group shared Jamie's thoughts, they continued on into the unknown, with Tom still puzzling over the map that he had brought with him for the journey. As they still made progress, Tom was now changing in his demeanor, slowly but surely becoming more cautious as the team gathered that something might be wrong. For the longest time, they had known Tom to be a wholly confident person, someone who always loved to take risks, and someone that did them without worry. The moment that they saw him take out the map for their adventure into the rainforest, each and every one of them felt that something was about to go wrong. The easygoing friend that they all knew was starting to have a hard time regulating his emotions now. Although there was never a time that they could describe him as angry, there were slightly nervous moments when he snapped back at those that trusted him and cared about him. Several times in the trip through the rainforest, Jamie would simply ask Tom if he recognized a species of an animal or tree that they went past. Each time, the attempt by anyone to make conversation was swiftly rejected by the group leader, who now seemed adamant that there was to be no more talking as the friends continued on into the heart of the rainforest. It was at this point that Jamie sensed that there was something deeply wrong indeed. His initial suspicions were now shifting to something much greater as he came to feel that Tom was hiding something from him. As much as he didn't want to disturb his friend any more than necessary, he was sure to make note of what was happening now. He knew that it could come in very useful later. Just as Jamie watched Tom closer than ever, the leader of the friends finally drew to a sudden stop. For the first time since the friends had started their voyage, Tom at last broke into a smile. "We're not too far away now," he said with glee. Instantly, everyone else could feel themselves relax somewhat. No matter how much it felt as though their trip had been derailed by Tom's will to discover something spectacular, it was more than pleasant to see their friend pleased with the progress. After all, many of them were now impressively fatigued after the many miles that they had hiked. If nothing else, they knew that this would give them a good opportunity for a well-earned break. "We don't have time to rest right now. Sorry, guys." The words were heavy as Tom told them that they needed to keep moving. As soon as they heard this, the rest of the group was reduced to groans, now sure that they might not get the opportunity to catch a break for quite a while. Even though they wanted to tell Tom that he would have to wait if he wanted to get going again, they knew that they couldn't afford to let their friend down. Of course, he had organized all of this. In a way, they really owed it to him to give their best effort. Perhaps, once they found out if anything was out here, they would then be able to do some real sightseeing. Until then, they would just have to follow Tom's lead. And so, everything continued, with the group trudging on with even less enthusiasm than before. Tom was the only one that remained enthusiastic about things, sure that his luck would soon turn around. Before long, he would have his hands on all the treasure that he could dream of. After a few more paces of torture for everyone else in the group, Tom finally let them know that they could relax. At long last, they had reached the final destination on Tom's map. The smile that they had seen on Tom's face a while back had now returned. Not long after, however, the young man was ready to get to work, soon producing a shovel from his backpack and driving it into the ground. After what felt like a whole hour of digging, the team was once again faced with the same fatigue and boredom that had followed them through the trip today. For some of them, this even meant that they were starting to get a little angry. They couldn't believe that Tom had thought of them this way. Did he really believe that they came to the other side of the world just to be his servants? Perhaps he didn't respect them quite as much as they had once thought. Just as Jamie opened his mouth to ask Tom if they should give up, there came a solid sound from the digging. Tom had found something. As the whole group gathered around frantically, ready to find what Tom had been telling them all about on the way here, they came to be quite disappointed. There was simply nothing there. It was nothing more than a rock, and a particularly large one at that. Of course, it wasn't exactly what any of them had in mind, especially given what Tom had described only earlier in the day. But then, just as the team was ready to resign themselves to disappointment, they saw just a hint of movement, a sign that not everything was so simple. Before any of the group could even move a muscle, the creature's plan was already in motion. As much as Tom had researched the area and various types of animals that resided here, there was nothing that could prepare him for what he was about to see. Of course, he had heard stories, read articles about there being something greater, something more powerful here. But this was still so far from anything that he could have expected. It was all of his worst nightmares rolled into one. At long last, the young man was able to see the error of his ways. What the team had uncovered was far from any kind of treasure. It was a gigantic snake. Tom staggered back as the full form of the beast emerged from the ground, desperate to now distance himself from what he had found. The young man was in such a rush that he almost stumbled backward, scrambling for his life as he did so. Only now, as his friends also rushed for cover, could he fully appreciate the size of the snake, which he now presumed to be a titanic boa constrictor. Its skin was an ominous inky black, its eyes silent and deadly as it bound itself up, ready to launch an attack at any time. Before long, the monster that had appeared before them now unraveled into its full size. Never in their lives had they seen something that boasted such power and speed. For the first time in the entirety of the journey, and perhaps in all of his life, Tom had utterly no idea what to do. In his head, he now desperately hoped that one of his friends would have a bright idea that would save them. There was nothing that he wouldn't do to get out of this right now. There simply had to be a way out. Just as this thought crossed his mind, he heard an eruption of sound. It turned out that one of his friends had indeed had a bright idea. Robert, who had always followed from the back during the adventure into the rainforest, had the idea of throwing a rock off into the distance, aiming for a boulder that had lodged itself into the clearing's center. The group of friends could barely believe their luck as the great snake snapped its head in the direction of the noise. They were not entirely sure if the monster was blind or was simply willing to know what else had dared enter its territory. Dreadfully, Tom was now starting to get the impression that the snake had not hunted them down, but rather they had been the ones to awaken it. It was only now that the initial shock of the situation died down, that he could finally start to calculate and wonder about what was actually happening here. What could possibly explain the appearance of this terrible beast? Just as he thought that he may never know, an image from the past finally flashed in his mind. It came from many months ago, just as he was piecing together his research for the expedition that the friends were to go on. As he had turned the page in the old notebook, he almost gasped with shock as he saw the gargantuan monster that was displayed in front of him. He felt almost childish as he did it, and yet there was nothing stopping him from slamming the book shut as soon as he saw the image. It was the most despicable thing that he had ever seen. All the more terrible was the fact that that animal was now right in front of him now, still seeming to decide where it wanted to go next. The giant snake was still clearly quite confused by the situation, snapping its head both ways once again before burrowing its way back into the folds of the rainforest, determined to find what else had dared to disturb it. The team breathed a collective sigh of relief as they saw the monster slide away from them, watching as it flattened the plants and greenery in its wake. It was nothing short of a miracle that they had survived the situation that Tom had placed them in. Nonetheless, they knew that they had to act fast if they were to stay alive, and of course, if they wanted to make it out of this place. "Come on," Jamie said, still short of breath as he tried to inspire some action into his friends. He knew as well as anyone here that they had to be quick if they wanted to put this behind them. Just as he reminded them to be urgent, however, Tom's greed led them astray once again. Although no one else had seen it, the leader of the group could not deny the touch of gold that appeared in the space where the snake had emerged. Pushing the others aside in spite of their protests, the young man made his way into the pit that they dug. Now, without the spade that he had brought with him, Tom did all that he could to unearth the treasure that he had been waiting for all this time. As fast as he could, he clawed at the earth until finally he was able to uncover what lay beneath the surface. It was more spectacular than he had even imagined. Even the rest of the group, who by now had become quite bored of Tom's attempts to uncover the treasure, had to admit that what he found was impressive. It shone almost as bright as the sun as they tried to adjust their eyesight. Even though this was not what they had come for as a team, several of them were already trying to calculate what the items might be worth if they were able to take them back home. It didn't take long for their wonder to come to a quick end, however. Before long, they could hear the deep hiss of the monster that had spared them only moments before. The great snake had returned. As the rest of the group fled back into the direction that they had come, Tom seemed quite frozen. In that moment, he was unable to choose between the gold and his life, with his heart beating rapidly and faster than ever before. He watched the trees in front of him, scanning for any sign of the monster that threatened its life. Surely he had enough time to make it out of here. In his heart, however, as he heard the hisses of the monster come closer and closer still, he knew that it was over. He had to get out of here now. As soon as this thought flashed through his mind, he bounded out of the pit. Just ahead of him now, as he sprinted his way to escape, he could see the outline of his friends. He was so close now, he just needed to make it a little further. As he continued to tear his way through the foliage, he finally reached the light again.